art, creativity, magic, happiness, life, woman. How far do they get along? And what happens when they stand up against each other? A poem that asks these questions and leaves us with just more than one set of answers is the one we are about to explore today, Alfred Tennyson's. Tennyson was the poet laureate of England in the Victorian times. We have already done Ulysses together, so you already know about the biographical details. But so far as this poem is concerned, we need to focus on the idea that Tennyson focused primarily on medieval themes and especially on themes that were connected to the Arthurian legends. His preoccupation with the Arthurian legends is seen especially in his translated work, Idylls of the King, which is basically a translation from Malory's Morte d'Arthur, containing Arthurian legends. So before going into the text, I would like you to first understand what Arthurian legends were. King Arthur was a mythological king. There is no historical evidence that strongly supports that there was a king called Arthur. But around this figure of Arthur, the entire idea of English chivalry identity was formed. Arthur had knights and he sent them on these quests. And in these quests, their target was to look for the Holy Grail, the cup of Christ, which was believed to contain even his blood. Now, there were many knights and we don't have to know about them, except one knight about whom we will come to know as we read this poem. This poem was first published in 1832. And then with Tennyson, you always have these revisions. So he revised, and he brought out the second edition in 1842. We will be looking at the final edition, that is 1842 edition. So if your textbook contains the 1832 edition, maybe you will find some lines different from the ones which I am reading. That is absolutely fine because finally they mean the same, the content is the same. It's just a variation of a stanza or a few lines. So what is this poem about? This poem is about a woman who lives in an island called Shalott, which is on the opposite side of Camelot, and Camelot is like a fort. And there's a river that flows between the two. This lady, she is confined in a prison kind of a place. It's not actually a prison, but the way she is kept there, it appears that she has no freedom at all. And all day long, she looks at a mirror and she sees the outside world reflected in that mirror, and she weaves patterns based on whatever she sees there. There is a curse that if she looks outside directly, then something bad would happen. In this poem, we'll see what happens if she at all transgresses and what are the consequences. After we finish reading this text, I would suggest you not to pause or stop the video. Continue till the end because we are going to discuss some very important issues which you might find useful in crafting your answers. And if possible, I'll also give a link of a write-up which I've prepared and I've published so that you can have a look at some basic points we have discussed here. So the first part, this poem is divided into 4 parts. The structure is that of a ballad. Ballad is a poem which tells any kind of a story. Sometimes they have a fairy tale-like quality and they have a regular metrical pattern. It's like you can recite them out aloud. With Tennyson, you will have melodious poetry. Even when you hate the things he writes, because sometimes you do hate the things he writes, you would still love the way the lines sound. He was a metrical genius. So the first part is a description of the situation that I have just told you about. Let's read it. On either side the river lie long fields of barley and of rye that clothe the wold and meet the sky, and through the field the road runs by to many-towered Camelot. And up and down the people go, gazing where the lilies blow, round an island there below, the island of Shalott. See, the musicality is already catching us, right? What is the content about? On either side of the river, as I told you, on one side there is Camelot, many-towered Camelot, it's like a city, and this side of it is the island of Shalott. Let's look at some of the difficult words we are coming across. Barley and rye are, of course, you know what they are. They are crops and it's farmland. The word wold is interesting here. It actually means rolling hills or woodland. So the place is of a serene natural beauty, almost reminiscent of the Lake District that we find in the poems of Wordsworth. And there is nothing sinister in these descriptions. It's all beautiful, calm. People are walking up and down. And then we come to the second stanza. Willows whiten, aspens quiver, little breezes dusk and shiver, through the wave that runs forever by the island in the river, flowing down to Camelot. Instantly, there is a change. You know why this change is coming about when we listen to it? That's why I always ask students to read the poems aloud. The first stanza, if you know a little bit about prosody, you would realize the first stanza is in iambic meter, which has a slow rhythm, often used in love poetry, and gives you a kind of a feeling of assurance. On either side the river lie, that kind of thing. And suddenly, in the second stanza, you come across that abrupt beginning of a trochee. And this stanza is written in trochaic meter. Willows whiten, aspens quiver. So something different is about to be described to you, something different from the things described in the first stanza. And what is that? Willows. Willows are, well, they are trees. Aspens are also trees. But willows are not just ordinary trees when it comes to the British imagination. Willows are often associated with death, with abandoned partners, sadness, and all those things. It has drooping leaves, and the underside of willows leaves, they are whitish. So when the wind comes and the leaves turn, it looks as if the willows are whitening. Willows whiten, aspens quiver, and aspens have these very small leaves. So when the air comes and the breeze comes, it looks as if the whole tree is quivering. So a kind of a supernatural element is added using natural components. This is something we have seen in Shakespeare, we have seen in Coleridge, and now we are seeing in Tennyson. Willows whiten, aspens quiver, as if they have a life of their own. Little breezes dusk and shiver. The word dusk is a noun, but here the word dusk is used as a verb. It's like the breezes, the air is bringing in the twilight. So nature is seen as an active personality, as an agent of change. Fine. Through the wave that runs forever by the island in the river, flowing down to Camelot. Then we have the description of the room or the house in which the lady lives. 4 grey walls and 4 grey towers overlook a space of flowers, and the silent isle embowers the Lady of Shalott. When you mention numbers like 4, you have this sense of a square place, a geometric finality. It is not like overflowing nature. It's not unrestricted. So, in contrast to the bountiful nature outside, the space provided to this lady is a limited one, and it is also grey, unlike the colourful nature all around her. So, all these things are giving us some hints that this lady is in some kind of a confinement, especially the word embowers. embowers means like she is inside an enclosure. For her safety, for her security, yes, but an enclosure nonetheless. So this is Our Lady of Shalott. By the margin, willow-veiled, margin means the margin of the river, the edge of the river, where you have willows, slide the heavy barges trailed. Now we have the description of the boats and the vessels which are gliding across the river. By slow horses and unhailed, the shallop flitteth silken sailed. So sometimes these small boats, they have silk-like sails. And there is a sense of laziness, of casual movement that we see. That there is no rush, no hurry, skimming down to Camelot. But who hath seen her wave her hand? But she never communicates with anybody of the outside world. Nobody has seen her waving her hand, or at the casement seen her stand. Casements are these vertical windows, long ones. But nobody has seen her looking out through her casement. Or is she known in all the land, the Lady of Shalott? So it's only her name which is known to everyone, and not even her name. Her personality, her title is known. She is a Lady of Shalott. Nobody knows her name. Only reapers reaping early in among the bearded burley. Reapers are the workers in the farm who look after the crops in reaping time. So the reapers, they come early and they hear something. Hear a song that echoes cheerily from the river winding clearly down to towered Camelot. So they can hear somebody singing. And by the moon the reaper weary. So when the reaper is tired, piling sheaves in uplands airy, listening, whispers, it's the fairy Lady of Shalott. So this lady, in being embowered in her castle and only singing out loud, that's her only way of communication, is considered to be a fairy. Now, fairy in those days, they were not just butterfly-like creatures that we think of them as of now. Fairies were powerful magicians. And this reaper, possibly he felt that this song revived him. He was so tired and he felt that this is the fairy. So a kind of a mythology grows. Legends grow out of realities. And Lady of Shalott is turned into a legend, is turned into a myth in her lifetime itself. Now we come to the second part. There she weaves by night and day a magic web with colours gay. What does she do all day? She weaves, and it's a magical web that she weaves. Normally, we associate webs with spiders. What are webs for the spiders? It's their home which protects them, and at the same time, the web acts like a net to trap insects on which the spider feeds. What is the web to this woman? Let's find out. A magic web with colours gay. So it's a beautiful tapestry kind of a thing. She has heard a whisper say, a curse is on her if she stay. So if she stops weaving and she looks out, something bad would happen. To look down to Camelot. She knows not what the curse may be, and so she weaveth steadily. And little other care hath she, the Lady of Shalott. And because she has no other work to do, she goes on weaving. And what does she weave? And moving through a mirror clear that hangs before her all the year, shadows of the world appear. There she sees the highway near, winding down to Camelot. So images which are reflected on the mirror, she captures them and transfers them to the web. So this web, just like a spider's web, becomes a receptacle of her imagination. And that makes her survive her solitude. So now you understand the connection between the isolated spider and this lonely lady. Now, this word shadows is again interesting from a different perspective when you think about Plato's concept of the world, that all we see around, these are not real things, these are shadows of the ideal forms. Okay, so what she does is she replicates these shadows. So she is the artist. There the river eddy whirls. A eddy is a swirling current within water. There the river eddy whirls, and there the surly village churls. Churls are those casual, rude, vulgar young men of the village. And the red cloaks of market girls pass on word from Shalott. So people are all over the place. They are communicating, they are living their lives, they are being themselves, and everything is reflected onto that mirror. Sometimes a troop of damsels glad, sometimes joyful girls, maidens, they came across. An abbot on an ambling pad. Pad here is a horse who is ambling, walking casually, not in a very high speed. So abbot is usually, he's the priest of an abbey or a church. He passes by. Sometimes a curly shepherd lad or long-haired page. Page is a servant in crimson clad. Now, servants of the royal households or noble houses, they used to wear red-colored uniform. So all kinds of people passed through and they were reflected in her mirror. And sometimes, through the mirror blue, the knights come riding two and two. Because Camelot was the place where, these knights, they gathered, they had meetings, and it was a very happening place. So the knights came. And why is the mirror blue? First of all, the mirror is blue because it reflects the sky. But metaphorically, symbolically, you can say that blue is associated with melancholy, gloominess. We say we are feeling blue. So somehow the image of the knights creates in the lady some kind of melancholia, some kind of depression, because she was so lonely and she had no knight who would love her, who would be with her, give her companionship. She hath no loyal knight and true, the Lady of Shalott. It's a very unique way of writing, Instead of saying she had no loyal and true knight, Tennyson says, she hath no loyal knight and true. Do you know what figure of speech this is? Maybe you can write in the comments, because we have already done a whole playlist on these, so I expect you to identify it. If not, I'll put that down in the description. So, this part was about the different scenes that she sees. But in her web, she still delights. Because, although she is all by herself, lonely, feeling miserable at times, it is in her work, in her creation, that she manages to find happiness, to weave the mirror's magic sights. For often through the silent nights, a funeral with plumes and lights and music went to Camelot. Sometimes funeral processions were decorated with these feathers and other decorative items. And she was quite joyful in looking at these things, these colorful things, and she replicated those in her web. But there were times when she also had this feeling that I've had enough. And Tennyson writes about those moments. Or when the moon was overhead, came two young lovers lately wed. I am half sick of shadows, said the Lady of Shalott. So it was hard for her to see that people out there, they could share love, intimacy, companionship. They could express desire to each other, and she had no one. So the Lady of Shalott was not a non-human fairy, but a human being with her various moods, her various anxieties, and her consolation too, her creation. Part 3. A bow shot from her bower eaves He rode between the barley sheaves. I want you to notice one thing. Part 1 and Part 2 are written in present tense. It's like something is there in front of Tennyson, something which is very much, it goes on forever, eternal, never-ending thing, and he's describing it. So you have present tense, and it happens in case of descriptive poetry. But what happens from Part 3 onwards is he begins using past tense. When do we use past tense? When we narrate something, when we tell a story of something that has already happened. So the mode of the poem changes from descriptive to narrative. A bow shot from her bower eaves. Bow shot is the distance an arrow takes when you shoot from a bow. So it's not very far. A bow shot from her bower eaves. Eaves are these sunshade-like projections on buildings, and it appears that the lady, she is sitting inside her bower, and a bow shot from her bower eaves, somebody comes riding. He rode between the barley sheaves. The sun came dazzling through the leaves and flamed upon the brazen greaves of bold Sir Launcelot. So greaves are items of clothing or armor that protect the lower legs. So this stanza describes how this knight, Sir Launcelot, was riding, and he was all dazzling because of his armor and the sun reflected. A red-crossed knight forever kneeled to a lady in his shield that sparkled on the yellow field beside remote Shalott. So Launcelot was one of the principal knights of the Grail legend, and I'll just digress a little bit to tell you about this Launcelot. He is the Red Cross Knight, and Red Cross Knight was the protagonist of the first book of the Fairy Queen and also appears in some subsequent books. His lover is Lady Una, and he also becomes friends with King Arthur, and it's said that he also has an secret affair with Arthur's wife. The legend goes like this, that he is part elf and he wears dented armor, but his most distinctive feature is his shield, and there is this red cross on his shield, which is a Christian design, because of which he is called the Red Cross Knight, and he stands for the virtue of holiness. So this is the backstory of the Red Cross Knight. But there is another version, which I'll tell you at the end, not right now. I won't give you out any spoilers yet. So this Red Cross Knight is described again in the next part. The gemmy bridle glittered free. So his bridle, the belt which controls the horse, it is also encrusted with gemstones, and it's sparkling. Like to some branch of stars we see hung in the golden galaxy. The bridal bells rang merrily as he rode down to Camelot. And from his blazoned baldric slung, baldric is, it's a diagonal belt worn over the shoulder for attaching weapons. And from his blazoned baldric slung, a mighty silver bugle hung. So he was all about music. When he was riding, the bridle was ringing, and then he was carrying a bugle, and not just that, he was also singing out loud. And as he rode, his armor rung beside remote Shalott, pretty noisy. All in the blue unclouded weather, thick jewel shone the saddle leather, the helmet and the helmet feather burned like one burning flame together. So he was all bright and shining in the daylight. As he rode down to Camelot, as often through the purple night, below the starry clusters bright, some bearded meteor, trailing light, moves over still Shalott. So he is compared, his movement is compared to the movement of a meteor, which has a long tail. So it's a bearded meteor, it's a shooting star. But we know that meteors are considered to be not so positive signs. They are considered to be ill omens in literature. So what ill omen do we expect here? His broad, clear brow in sunlight glowed. On burnished hooves his war horse trode. From underneath his helmet flowed his coal-black curls as he rode down to Camelot. From the bank and from the river he flashed into the crystal mirror. Tira lira by the river sang Sir Launcelot. So not just his armor, his weapons, everything was making noise, his bugle is there, but he also sings out. And the lady is looking at this charming knight in the mirror. She left the web, she left the loom, she made 3 paces through the room. She saw the water lily bloom, she saw the helmet and the plume, she looked down to Camelot. She. It's called anaphora, and it's used to emphasize something, to suggest a kind of an urgency, action. It's almost cinematic. And it's like that moment is captured and stretched in front of us in some kind of a time lapse. Out flew the web and floated wide. The mirror cracked from side to side. The curse is come upon me, cried the Lady of Shalott. The moment of transgression. And what happens, see? The web, which had been her creation, and the mirror, which had been the source through which she got her inspiration, both of them reacted at the same time. They abandoned her. She was denied any more access to that world, and the curse had started to materialize. And we don't know yet what the curse is. Part 4. In the stormy east wind straining, the pale yellow woods were waning, the broad stream in his banks complaining, heavily the low sky raining over towered Camelot. You see how the scenery changes. It's like nature is becoming an echo of this lady's distress and this pathetic fallacy in which you see nature is almost performing a human action, shows that this moment everything has changed for Shalott. It was not the peaceful island for her anymore. Down she came and found a boat beneath a willow left afloat. She comes down from a castle, gets a boat, and round about the prow she wrote, the Lady of Shalott. So prow is the front end of the boat, and she writes the phrase, the Lady of Shalott. She doesn't write her name, but she wants to be identified, that this is me. And down the river's dim expanse, like some bold seer in trance. This expression, where Tennyson is connecting the Lady of Shalott with a bold seer, a prophet, again is directly connected to the expression that she was looking at the shadows of the world. So this idea of the poet as a prophet, as a seer, the creator as somebody who can look into the future, that is reinforced here. So Lady of Shalott is clearly a creative artist, and she is now looking at Camelot, but she doesn't look with any kind of personal connection. She looks like an observer with objectivity of an artist. And there's something glassy about her focus. She is not totally focused as an individual would focus on a place she is about to reach. Seeing all his own mischance with a glassy countenance, did she look to Camelot. And at the closing of the day, she loosed the chain and down she lay. So she gets inside that boat. The broad stream bore her far away, the Lady of Shalott. She did not use any oars. She did not consciously let the boat go toward a certain target. She just surrendered, and the boat took her away. Lying robed in snowy white, that loosely flew to left and right, the leaves upon her falling light, through the noises of the night she floated down to Camelot. Well, snowy white is suggestive of virginity, purity. And we know that this lady had been without any companion. So she is representative, a symbol of maidenhood. But we have leaves falling upon her. It's like the leaves are replicating her fall. Why has she fallen? What is her sin? That she has just looked at a man, found sinful, I guess. And as the boat head wound along the willowy hills and fields among, they heard her singing her last song, the Lady of Shalott. In the 1832 version, Tennyson actually uses the expression like a swan, connecting this idea with Lady of Shalott's song, that when swans die, they sing for the last time a very beautiful song. And she is like a swan, especially also because she is robed in white. And then that was revised and taken away in the 1842 version. So she was singing, and then she was not singing anymore. And what happened to the people who were listening to it? They heard a carol, mournful, holy. Now, although nowadays we understand carol as prayer songs, like Christmas carols, but carols originally mean songs, and therefore this additional qualification that this carol that she sang was mournful and holy is legitimate here. Chanted loudly, chanted lowly, till her blood was frozen slowly, and her eyes were darkened wholly, turned to towered Camelot. And while these lines, especially these words, holy, lowly, slowly, gives a lullaby kind of an effect, when we come to the expression turn to towered Camelot, the overuse of T jars out of this kind of a lullaby. So it's like she is falling asleep in her own song. And then reality hits us that she has reached a place where people would hardly recognize her. For ere she reached upon the tide, the first house by the waterside, singing in her song she died, the Lady of Shalott. So before she even reached the first house, she died. Under tower and balcony, by garden wall and gallery, a gleaming shape she floated by. So now she becomes an object of gaze. She had been looking at objects reflected on her mirror all through her life. She had been the gazer, and now she becomes the object people gaze on. And she has become just a shape, a gleaming shape she floated by. Dead pale between the houses high, silent into Camelot. Out upon the wharfs they came. Wharfs are those planks or jetties, constructed between shore and water, on which you go and then you land onto a boat. So people came and crowded on that wharf. Knight and burgher, lord and dame. Burghers are prominent leading townsmen, citizens, so nobility. So people from the town, they came gathered to look, and round the prow they read her name, the Lady of Shalott. Nobody knew her, like nobody could recognize her looking at her face. But they saw that name inscribed and they understood that, okay, this is Lady of Shalott. And then they ask, who is this? And what is here? Note the word what. And what is associated with objects, right? We say, what is this? To mean some object. When we refer to a human being, we say, who is this? So she is referred to as what? As I told you, she has now become an object of gaze. And in the lighted palace near died the sound of royal cheer. Everybody was scared. And why were they scared? Because what you don't understand causes fear. And what they have not understood, a single woman, all by herself, challenging some kind of norms. It is hard to understand indeed. And they crossed themselves for fear, all the knights at Camelot. But Lancelot mused a little space. So what happens to Lancelot? This was because of him that the lady died. What recognition does Shalott get from Lancelot for her death, for her sacrifice? He said, "She has a lovely face. God in his mercy lend her grace, the Lady of Shalott." So the extreme impersonality of his reaction, just commenting that she has a lovely face and that may God bless her, it shows a kind of utter futility that for this man, Lady Shalott died. He didn't even know. Then what is this poem about? Is this poem about unrequited love, unacknowledged love? Is it about love at all? Because was the Lady of Shalott in love with Lancelot, or was she too tired of her solitude? Now the thing is, when he looks at that woman lying dead, he tells that she has a pretty face. So a woman is evaluated only according to her beauty. No one came to know about her creativity, the images she had woven all her life. So was it all in vain? And what was this curse about? Was she cursed because she was beautiful? Or was she cursed because she was creative? First, we'll talk about the theme of the poem. Why did Tennyson choose this theme at all? Now, I want to give you a quote from Edgar Allan Poe. He writes in The Philosophy of Composition, "The death then of a beautiful woman is unquestionably the most poetical topic in the world." And not just poetical topic. There are hosts of paintings on things like Ophelia's death, on Lady of Shalott's death. So, yes, Poe is right. And this theme is therefore very much relevant to Tennyson, who was always obsessed with idea of death, mortality, creativity and all that. Especially if you think about the way he wrote such a long elegy all through his life in memoriam. But more than just being a simple narrative, we do have moments of dramatic movement in the poem. And Tennyson is such a craftsman, I would say, that he manipulates his poem, uses words in such a strategic manner that he will leave you hints which we might not notice. For example, if you look at the whole poem, you would see that the fifth line of all the stanzas, except one, the fifth line ends with the word Camelot. The only stanza where it doesn't do that, we have the word Lancelot. So that stanza is like an aberration. It's an anomaly. The moment where a change is foreshadowed, that an order is disrupted, even the poetic order. So these are the tricks or hints, you can see, that Tennyson gives us. By the way, all the stanzas end in Shalott. And it's a mighty work, writing such a huge poem and maintaining this consistency. So obviously, he could easily, in that stanza, which I'm talking about, end the fifth line in Camelot. But he doesn't do that. It's a deliberate change that he brings in. Again, as I've told you, the first and the second part, being in the present tense, shows something that is descriptive, static, unchanging. Part 3 and 4 is about change, is about transience, is about passage of time, is about mortality. But why Lancelot? What is so special about him? Now, I told you in the beginning that Tennyson had translated Malory's Morte d'Arthur. So he knew very well different kinds of stories associated with Lancelot. And he knew the story of Elaine, the fair maid of Astolat. Astolat sounds like Shalott, right? Now, this story goes like this. Elaine nurses Lancelot when he was sick, and then she falls in love with him, and then she tells him that she loves him, but he turns her down. Heartbroken, she kills herself. But in this poem, Tennyson does not make it obvious in any way that Lancelot knew the Lady of Shalott. So these are the subtle ways in which he represents, I wouldn't say represents, I would say represents mythologies. So what are our final interpretations of this poem? Yes, it's a metaphor for the solitary nature of the artist, suggesting that the artist must be distanced. Once you are personal, connected, you cannot be creative. Fine. That's a general sense. But it's also a poem on the woman who is imprisoned by some kind of a curse. And if you're interested, you can look up the poem The Palace of Art, where Tennyson tells the story of a solitary figure of soul who builds a magnificent palace filled with art and beauty, but ultimately finds herself trapped within the walls. So when we combine these interpretations, we get to understand the need of anonymity, especially if we think about women writers in the Victorian times. Currer Bell, Alice Bell, Acton Bell, George Eliot. How many more names do we need? Anonymity was kind of a protection that women critics chose to embrace, just like the Lady of Shalott, only till she could not anymore. And I wonder if our selfie-obsessed, Facebookish, Instagramish personalities can even comprehend the curse of being unrecognized, of being faceless. Or perhaps only we can know how cursed that is. With these thoughts, I will leave you. See you soon in my next video. Till then, this is Monami Mukherjee signing off. Bye-bye.